Good evening to you and welcome to the KPTSKansas.com 4th District Congressional Debate. We are live from the KPTS studio right here in Wichita. We're broadcasting on Channel 8 and on both the KPTS and the Wichita Eagle Facebook pages. Hello, I'm Susan Peters. I'll be your moderator for tonight. Let's go over the rules first. Each candidate will get 90 seconds for an opening statement and 90 seconds for a closing statement. Now, in between, they'll be asked questions from our three panelists, maybe a couple from yours truly, and from you, the viewers, through Facebook Live. Now, the three panelists, let's introduce them first. Reporter Dion Lefler from the Wichita Eagle. Political science professor Russel Arben Fox from Friends University. And reporter George Lawson from KFDI Radio. Thank you all for being here tonight. Now, each candidate will get up to 90 seconds to answer each question. If a candidate, though, specifically criticizes the other, now that other candidate will get 30 seconds to rebut. And as the moderator, I will decide whether a rebuttal is warranted. By the way, this race is actually a rematch of the 2017 special election, which became necessary when Mike Pompeo vacated his seat to become U.S. Secretary of State. So now let's meet the two candidates who have run against each other before. They are incumbent Republican Representative Ron Estes and Democrat challenger James Thompson, an attorney from Wichita. Thank you both for being here and participating in this live debate. Appreciate it. Now, the candidates drew straws right before we went on the air, and as a result, James Thompson will be the first to give his opening statement. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much, Susan. Hi, everybody. I'm James Thompson. I am a U.S. Army infantry veteran. I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I'm a civil rights attorney here in Wichita running for Congress. Now, many of you already know that I grew up in poverty and was even homeless at one point as a child. But I went into the military and was able to pull myself out of poverty because of the things that I learned in the United States military, things about honor and courage and working together with people to get the goals and missions accomplished. Right now, our country is broken. We have a lot of partisanship on both sides of the aisle. And every day, members of our Congress are pushing off their responsibilities in Congress to the corporate lobbyists who have funded their campaigns, or to the big government regulators who are passing laws without any kind of government oversight. And we've got to end this. We need to make sure that we're sending someone to Congress who is going to fight for the people of Kansas. I can promise you that when I go to Congress, I'm going to fight for the people of Kansas. I'm going to fight for our veterans. Unlike a lot of people out there, I do know firsthand what it's like to lose someone to PTSD. And losing one person to PTSD is one too many. I'm going to fight for our senior citizens and make sure that we protect Medicare and Social Security from Wall Street tax breaks. And I'll protect our children as well and make sure they get the education and health care they need. My name's James Thompson, and I'd appreciate your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Now, Congressman Estes, 90 seconds.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank KPTS and Wichita Eagle for organizing this debate. And thank you, Susan Peters, for being the moderator, as well as all of our panelists here. I'm Ron Estes. I grew up in rural Kansas on a farm where my mom still lives today. Growing up, my parents instilled with me a hard work ethic, and that work ethic has stuck to this day. As an engineer, I focused on how do we solve problems, working with a variety of industries, including aerospace, energy, and several manufacturing companies. And most importantly, as a father and husband, our three kids have gone to public schools, and we want to make sure that we focus on how do we make the Kansas better for the next generation. This election is really about two things. One, do you want bigger government and bigger taxes? Or do you want smaller government with more freedom to choose? And second, the election's about whether you want results or whether you want resistance and obstruction. For our economy, the results speak for themselves. Just today, the unemployment rate was announced to be 3.7%, which is the lowest it's been since December of 1979. I come home to Kansas every week and listen to constituents about the issues that are of concern to them and how do I best represent them in Washington. We've accomplished a lot in the last year, but we've got more to do. And I look forward to talking about the issues tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson and Congressman Estes. Our first panelist to ask a question will be Dion Lefler of the Wichita Eagle. Dion.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, I will begin with you. You have in this campaign been targeted by advertising based on police reports from 2000 and 2001, alleging that you punched a male customer and on a different occasion slapped a female customer when you were employed as a bartender while you were in law school. This ad was paid for by the Republican Party and approved by Representative Estes. Could you explain from your perspective what happened in those two incidents and what the ultimate outcome of them was? And Representative Estes, in your turn, do you stand by this ad, and what do you see as the significance of these incidents?
Diane, thank you very much for asking me that question. These ads are another example of the disgusting lies that are being perpetrated against me by my opponent. There was an incident in 2000 where a woman was thrown out of the nightclub that I worked at while I was putting myself through school, and she went down 4 days later and complained that I had slapped her. Where she got my name, I don't know. I've never once hit a woman. I've never once struck a woman in throwing them out of a club or anything else. What's disgusting about this is that case was dismissed. It wasn't me. That case was expunged from my record. The other case was a battery where I threw a guy out. In that case, I did hit him. He hit me when I was throwing him out, and I hit him back. And I'm telling you right now, today, that if you hit me, I'm going to hit you back. That's just the way it works. And that's the way it works in the bar industry. What's sad about this, though, is Mr. Estes has used this as an example of something to put out into the public, even though he knows the truth of the matter. He's weaponized violence against women as a way to score political points. And it's disgusting. We deserve better than that from our congressman. We deserve better than lies and smear campaigns. We deserve a congressman who's going to talk about the issues in this campaign rather than trying to dig up old news that is not even true. So I think we can do better.
So what I was shocked with was when this information was brought to me was how serious this was. I mean, as Mr. Thompson just said, he did hit this bar patron of his. What he didn't say, what was included in the police report, was that the bouncers at the bar held the individual as he hit him and kicked him. That was the part that was shocking to me. And you know, we all understand that when people are drinking, bar patrons are drinking, they sometimes can be belligerent. And that's why you have bouncers to take care of that. But just that physical violence that you'd want to do just to get back at somebody for not giving you a tip is a terrible thing to do. The incidents about slapping the young woman goes back to the case never was filed because the DA allowed the time limit to expire before it was brought forth. But as Mr. Thompson said, the incidents did happen. The woman was at the bar, and as he admitted tonight, he did hit the individual. And I just think as we work together to try to solve our nation's problems, we have enough belligerence in Washington. We've seen it a lot the last couple of weeks with all this attacking people trying to go through the debate about who should be our Supreme Court nominee. We're having people accosted in restaurants as they're trying to eat with their family. And that's not good for civil discourse. It's not good for us working together to solve those problems.
Mr. Thompson, would you like 30 seconds to rebut?
I would. What Mr. Estes doesn't want to talk about is the fact that the case was dismissed. He didn't include that in any of the attack ads that he's thrown out there. He doesn't want to include the actual facts of the case. What he wants to do is allow people to draw conclusions off of using violence against women as a smear tactic, as a political point. And as we have seen this week, when you start making allegations, you should have proof and you should have investigations. These things did get investigated by the police. The case was dismissed, period.
Thank you. Our next panelist will have a question. Friends University political science professor Russel Fox. Russell?
Representative Estes, having just mentioned the Supreme Court and Judge Kavanaugh, I'd like to ask you a question about that. With the cloture vote today, Judge Kavanaugh's appointment to the Supreme Court is almost certainly assured. Now, many legal observers have felt that when Judge Kavanaugh is on the court, we would have a potential majority of justices who would be willing to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision. And in so doing, abortion would no longer be a constitutional right, but rather it would be subject to statutory decisions made by Congress or made by state legislatures. If, while in Congress, such a court case did come and Roe v. Wade was overturned and it was returned to the states and Congress to deal with, what would be your legislative position? And Mr. Thompson, the same question for you. If Roe v. Wade were overturned and you happen to be in the House of Representatives, what would be your position?
Well, I think as we've seen over the years, law gets changed in different court peelings over time. We saw that with Roe v. Wade, and then some of the subsequent rulings that came out actually pushed that, said that it's not just a pure cut and dry. The states can put some restrictions on it. We've seen states over the years actually put those restrictions in place. We actually debate several legislative actions in DC over the last year and a half. We focused on things like the pain-capable legislation, where actually making sure that when the baby that's unborn can feel pain, they shouldn't be aborted. I mean, that's one of those issues that, a sanctity of life aspect. So I would continue to support legislation like that helps make sure that we protect life, that we make sure that people have the right to what we declare they have as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much. I find it rich that my opponent would talk about the sanctity of life or protecting life when all he's really concerned about is birth. He doesn't give a damn about a child after it's been born. He doesn't care that the child doesn't have health care, or the child can't get educated, or that the woman can't get child care while she tries to find work. Doesn't care that the woman doesn't get paid as much as a man. Doesn't care that women are suffering from domestic violence at alarming rates, and we are not putting enough teeth in the law to do something about it. So when we talk about making sure that we're protecting life, we need to protect all life. I also find it rich that my opponent, who wants to claim that he is against big government, insists on big government when it comes to our personal lives, whether it's with a woman's right to choose and control her own body, or whether it's with passing legislation that allows the U.S. government to do warrantless searches of our phones and our text messages. This is big government at its worst, infringing upon our personal freedoms. So for me, what I'd like to see if something like that does occur, Dr. Fox, is to make sure that we pass laws at the federal level to protect a woman's individual rights to bodily autonomy. That is the most important thing.
Mr. Estes, would you like to rebut the
Yes,
first part of this?
I would like to rebut some of the false statements that he said. When he talked about the things that we've accomplished over the last year, I mean, we've passed, for the first time, solid human trafficking projections that actually protect women who've been victims of sexual abuse or victims of prostitution. We're looking out for those victims. We've passed legislation to pay for mental health support for those individuals that need it. To say that we don't care about we don't care about people once they're born, we only care about the unborn is false. And we need to look at the record to be able to talk about that.
Thank you very much. The next question will come from George Lawson from KFDI Radio. George.
Mr. Thompson, Colorado and some states on the West Coast have legalized recreational marijuana, and other states are looking at reform of marijuana laws and the issue of using marijuana for medical purposes, and some bills on marijuana reform have been introduced in Congress. Where do you stand on the issue? And same question for Mr. Estes. If not recreational use, would you consider medical purposes?
I want to be very clear about this. I support the full legalization of marijuana because it makes financial sense for our state, it makes social sense for our criminal justice system, and it makes humane sense for our veterans and our people in this state suffering from things like cancer or Parkinson's disease. As a veteran, I know the battles that my brothers and sisters are going through out there, dealing with PTSD on a daily basis. My own family has suffered from the loss of a family member due to PTSD and him taking his own life. If our veterans are given access to medical marijuana, they can get off opioids. They can do things that will give them relief without getting them addicted to another substance. We have to do better in this country. We have an opioid epidemic right now that is taking lives on a daily basis, and we're doing nothing about it. Marijuana could help solve that problem. criminal justice reform. We're putting kids in jail for having a dime bag of weed on them rather than making sure that we're addressing the underlying problem, which is legalizing marijuana. If you legalize it, you can tax it, you can use that money for our schools, for our police departments, and for numerous other things around our state that we need. It's the moral thing to do, it's the just thing to do, and it's the humane and right thing to do for people who are suffering on a daily basis with pain and can't get the relief that they need and don't want to be addicted to opioids. It is something that we need to legalize, and we need to stop being behind the 8 ball in this state and actually get on with a program and legalize it.
Representative Estes.
You know, one of the great things about the way our country's structured is that states were set up to kind of be pilot programs of that. As far as marijuana, we have an excellent pilot program that's operating now in Colorado. We're looking at right now what kind of facts are coming out of that process. We're hearing a lot about one side of that issue where focusing on the money that's being collected by tax revenue through that. But what we haven't talked a lot about is what's the increased cost on law enforcement side, what's the increased cost in terms of how it affects workers and employees, what's the actual still street cost for illegal drugs, because there's an underground market still for illegal drugs because people don't want to pay the taxes and they're trying to avoid that process. So I think it's a little early in that experiment to bring that to Kansas and bring that forth. One of the things I do think we need to do more of is explore what are those medicinal values of some of those. You know, we're learning a lot over society over the last few years of what some of these treatments can be, what kind of benefits there are. You know, every day it seems like there's a new discovery about some component in some plant or in some animal, in some breakdown that helps with curing some disease or supporting some pain relief, and I think that's worthwhile to look at. How do we look at opportunities for that pain relief?
Okay, thank you. Next question comes from Dion Lefler again. Dion?
For Representative Estes, in about the last year or so, the country has gone through a series of deadly and painful mass shootings. This week marked the first anniversary of the massacre at the street concert in Las Vegas. And we've also had the Parkland school shooting. These and other instances have renewed calls for the restoration of the federal assault weapons ban, which was allowed by Congress to expire in 2004. Do you support or oppose restoration of that law, and why? Also, what do you see as Congress's role in addressing this problem, if not gun control legislation?
I think one of the things I want to say clearly is that I'm an avid supporter of our Second Amendment rights, that we want to make sure that we support the people's right to bear arms. What we've seen in so many of these instances where they're shooting, there's some mental health problems throughout the country right now. And in almost every case that we've had that individual either had a known mental health issue, or there were indications of it, or in a couple of cases that they actually were reported to the FBI, they were reported to law enforcement, and nothing was done to stop that. I mean, one of the other things that we saw in particularly a couple of the school settings is that there apparently wasn't enough or next to no security in those school facilities to allow individuals to get into that. I know from all the schools I've visited around here that there's a very good check process to get into the building, to know who's in the building at what time, making sure that we're maintaining the safety of our children. As I mentioned earlier, you know, our 3 children going through the public school system, one still is in high school, and we want to make sure that all of our kids are protected and safe from any kind of violence, whether it's from gun violence or whether it's from bullying.
Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much. You know, unfortunately, we hear a lot of things about thoughts and prayers, and we hear a lot of political doublespeak like we've just heard. The fact of the matter is, though, is that our Congress is not doing its job. It's not doing what it needs to do to sit down and get some real solutions on the table here. I am in the military, or was in the military. I have grown up around guns. I've been shooting since I was 4 years old. I don't believe in any kind of a ban on a weapon. But what I do believe is in gun safety. We need to make sure that gun safety is a priority. We need to make sure that we have people that are, when they buy a gun, they know how to use that gun, that they know which end fires which. You know, right now, we need to be working on universal background checks, which most of the country supports. We need to make sure that we set that up so that when you go to a gun show, which I like to do, that you can take that a gun, you can buy it or sell it there, and make sure that there is a background check system in place that you can use your phone to put the person's information in and go, oh, I've got a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And you can sell it or not sell it, and that way you've done your due diligence to make sure that the person can own the gun. If there's a problem, that person can then go take it up and make sure that they get that addressed. But we don't even want to have those kind of conversations. People on both sides refuse to sit down and have a conversation about reasonable gun safety. I'm a responsible gun owner. I keep my guns locked up. We need to make sure that everybody that owns a gun is a responsible gun owner and takes that right very seriously and then uses the responsibilities as well.
Can I rebut that comment?
Sure.
Nothing's been done. You know, one of the things that education is a state and local priority. And we don't want the federal government coming in and dictating things. In some states and local governments, they've been doing a great job with resources in terms of making sure there's a resource officer, making sure there's school security. We don't want the federal government to come in as a heavy hand, but what we did do this year was appropriate millions of dollars after this shooting this summer to make sure that we had some funding to help jumpstart that and help those local school districts get some of those security provisions.
Thank you, Mr. Estes. Next question will come from Russel Fox. Russell?
Mr. Thompson, this one's first going to you. Now, over the last several years, with the legalization of same-sex marriage and the increased attention to LGBTQ citizens, there's been a bit of a conflict that has emerged in regards to devout religious believers who feel it is their constitutional right not to be compelled to provide personal services or commercial services to those whose lifestyles they disagree with. Where do you think the proper balance lies between respecting religious liberty and also expecting equal treatment of all American citizens? And Representative Estes, same question to you. Where would you locate that balance as well?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Fox. I went through law school, and a majority of what I do in practice regards the Constitution. And having gone through different classes and looked at a lot of different cases, the same arguments that I saw against same-sex marriage was the same arguments I saw against interracial marriage. And we've got to make sure that we don't allow bigotry to override our common sense here in this country. Religious liberty is important, and what you do in your church must be protected. But when you're talking about interstate commerce and the ability for people to come in and buy something from you, you have to go back and look at the law. I think that the law was very clear that you can't affect interstate commerce by making restrictions against somebody based on a religious preference or any kind of other preference that would allow you to discriminate against somebody. I think that protecting people, making sure that they have the right to go across state lines and buy things when they go out in public, to go into public places, is what has to be done and what has to be protected. We cannot, though, allow the government to come in and start imposing requirements on churches that they have to marry somebody. That is against the First Amendment. But making sure that we are preventing discrimination in our country and abiding by that separation of church and state is of the utmost importance, and we need to make sure that we maintain that.
Representative Estes.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm a firm believer that the marriage definition is between one man and one woman. That's been that way for thousands of years. That doesn't mean that there's not necessarily other alternatives, that people may choose to live together, but that's still the choice in the definition of marriage. You know, when we look forward at the actual instance dealing with the cake situation and actually the lawsuit that was filed because a baker didn't want to support a cake or bake a cake that was the design that was requested for a gay wedding. And you know, that process ultimately went through the court system and was ruled by the Supreme Court that they had the legal right to do that. And what we've seen out of that is now some individuals have come back and started another lawsuit. In fact, based on the Colorado process, the Human Rights Organization in Colorado has actually started this process all over again, just because they firmly believe a different way than what the U.S. Supreme Court's ruled. So it's kind of a sad state on where we've gotten to in the environment today, is that people aren't willing to accept that allow people to live the life they want to live, but not necessarily force your lifestyle on them.
Okay, thank you. If I'm going to ask the next question. We all know Congress people don't vote on Supreme Court justices, so this is not a question of whether Brett Kavanaugh should be on the Supreme Court, but is a few questions. I think most people would agree that what happened in Washington the last couple of weeks was a circus, and each party, I think most people would agree, is blaming each other. So the question is, specifically, Mr. Thompson, do you blame Republicans? And Mr. Estes, do you blame Democrats, number one? And number two, okay, blame game over with. What specific ideas do each of you have to get past this partisan problem we have and get the two parties to do what they were elected to do? So I guess Mr. Thompson is first on this.
Okay. Thank you, Susan, very much for that question. And you nailed it on the head when you said it was a circus, and it has been a circus. As far as who I blame both parties, because both parties are more worried about the partisanship, more worried about scoring political points than getting to the truth of the matter. You know, I believe that Judge Kavanaugh and Dr. Ford both deserved due process in this case and a chance to clear his name and find out whether or not the allegations were in fact true or not. But instead what we got was, again, partisanship. So how do we solve that? Well, I think the problem is dark money and big corporate PACs and payments to our legal officials. It's legalized bribery. You know, right now it's not one person, one vote, it's $1, one vote, and how much money can you get from a particular corporation, which is why I don't take any corporate PAC money, because when I go there, nobody's going to own me, nobody's going to push their agenda on me. I'm going to be going there representing the 4th District. You know, we have an opportunity right now to start sending people there that don't take corporate PAC money. My opponent does. He takes an incredible amount. I've had 46,000 individual donations with an average of about $28. My opponent has had 1,500 or so, with an average of over $1,100 per donation. He gets a huge amount of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, from corporate PACs. It's wrong. It causes partisanship.
Can I rebut his comments before I answer about the PAC money? I mean, James, as an attorney, you should know that corporate donations have been illegal since 1970 in the Tillman Act. And it was reinforced in the McCain-Feingold Act. All PACs today are made up of individuals who contribute money, and you're wanting to sound a lot more justified and holistic by calling your folks that make contribution union PACs, but every PAC is made up of individual workers for every company who makes a contribution to those PACs. As far as the Supreme Court ruling goes, let me be clear on the front end. If somebody's been a victim of a crime or victim of particularly a sexual assault, they need to have the opportunity to have their case heard. But in this particular case, it really turned into demagoguery. And I literally do blame the Senate Democrats. And the reason being is this charge was made available in July. It was discussed in July. It could have been brought into the process for Judge Kavanaugh's hearing. They would have had time to investigate it, to go through that a sound process before the committee hearing, and it was held back because they wanted to do some political shenanigans. And then ultimately it was leaked to the media. So definitely there's some political games going on. I think we need to make sure that what we do is that as we support victims of crimes, that we also make sure that we don't trample due process for anybody that's accused of a crime. I don't want my daughters to ever be a victim of sexual assault, but I also don't want my son to ever be a victim of being accused of something that he didn't do and just take it for granted because they're not doing due process and protection of them.
All right, thank you very much. Go ahead.
I find it rich that that's what my opponent would say, considering he's willing to cast aspersions on me with things that are untrue. Given that in of itself, it's again, Ron Estes doesn't know how to tell the truth if he has to. We have corporate PACs in this country. lots of them. And either Ron doesn't want to tell you the truth or he doesn't know. And either way, it means he's incompetent and should not be in Congress.
Yeah, that was too outlandish. I mean, from that standpoint, is that James is an attorney. He's supposed to be smart enough to know that there aren't corporate donations that go into PACs. They're individuals, they're workers. And to call me a liar because of that was outlandish for him to do. I mean, that's beneath the standards of somebody who wants to be in Congress to represent us and to make sure that he can stand forth for the 4th District and support us.
Mr. Fox, do you want to take the next question?
I actually have a two-part question, two different questions that are closely related to each other, and I think it's appropriate since you had just mentioned circuses. I'm going to begin with Representative Estes. Representative Estes, President Trump has described the Mueller investigation into the possible connections between his presidential campaign and various Russian hackers and other agents as a witch hunt and a disgrace. Do you agree with the president's view of things? And the interrelated question for Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, if after the midterm elections the Democrats take control of one or both houses of Congress, there are factions within the Democratic Party that have spoken very openly about pursuing impeachment against the President of the United States. Would you support that effort if you were in office? Representative Estes, your question about the Mueller investigation first.
Let's talk about the special prosecuting law. I mean, there's been enough discussions over the years about it being used for witch hunts. Currently, a Republican president, Republican administration is being targeted. Some of those very same things were done during the Clinton investigation from the special prosecutor. I think one of the things we need to do is go back and review that special prosecution law and look at how it's used and what do we do with that. Right now, what we've seen is in the last year and a half, the special prosecutor's been chasing Russian conspiracy theories that they found no evidence from the president's standpoint. Spent millions of dollars doing that. There's really no checks and balances. There's no place they say that they're done, that they finished their effort. There are some, there have been a couple of cases of unrelated charges that they filed and gone through that process, and it's good that people get prosecuted for things they've done wrong, but we have an FBI, we have a legal system to go through that, and you don't necessarily need the special prosecution to go through that. As far as people talking about impeachment, there have already been 2 motions on the floor of the House in the term that I've been here that were brought up to impeach the president, just because people don't like what he's doing, don't like the policies. But he was voted in, and he should be allowed to execute those policies to have his administration be successful. And it's been dragging out to get his people confirmed to actually implement those policies.
Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Susan. I've been asked this question several different times. Would I support the impeachment of President Trump? And the fact of the matter is I don't know. I haven't been privy to the information that is the evidence that would be used to impeach him. I don't think the congressman has either. So I think it's inappropriate for anyone to say how they would vote on impeachment until they've actually seen evidence. That's the role of the Congress in this process, is to make sure that you're looking at evidence and making a decision based on that evidence. Not what you think, not what you think you know or what the media has told us, but what people can actually prove. And at this point, I haven't seen any evidence. So until I see actual evidence, I think it serves an injustice to the president and to Congress to say how you would rule one way or the other until you've actually looked at it. We have a special prosecutor that is investigating issues related to Russia and lots of other issues. I respect law enforcement enough to make sure that they are given the tools that they need to do their investigation, and if they find evidence of a crime, to pursue that. They have to be given that leeway to do that so that they can do their job. And they'll either find evidence or not. And to say that there's been no evidence at all, we have seen plenty of indictments already that show that it's been fruitful. We need to make sure that we respect our law enforcement and Bob Mueller and make sure that he has the opportunity to complete his investigation and do it properly.
Can I make a rebuttal about the evidence?
Sure.
Approximately a year ago, there was evidence released. First, it was released in a confidential setting that we were able to see it in the House, a memo from discussion about what the FBI knew, when they knew it, what the process they went through in gathering that information. The Democrats in the Intelligence Committee didn't like that result, so they created a second memo. Ultimately, the president agreed for those to be released with some redactions. So there have been evidence that continues to show that there hasn't been anything that's true to these charges.
Mr. Lawson, George Lawson from KFDI has the next question.
Thank you. Mr. Estes, the tax cut bill that was approved last year has reduced personal and corporate income taxes. There have been some positive effects from that bill, but the bill has had some critics. They've said it would have an impact on the federal budget deficit. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated that the tax cut will add close to $2.3 trillion to the federal debt over 10 years. And some are saying this will be a tax increase over time for individuals, and they'll begin seeing higher rates around 2027. What can Congress do to ease the impact on the deficit and on individual taxpayers down the road? And for Mr. Thompson, what are your thoughts on the tax cut, and what would you like to see in the area of tax reform? We'll start with Mr. Estes.
So let's talk about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I mean, every individual in America got a tax cut through that. And so many provisions of that benefited low income and medium income folks. We increased the standard deduction, almost doubled it, increased the child deduction, doubled that. So there's so many benefits that hit every individual. One of the things the Congressional Budget Office does when it analyzes a bill, which it did last December when the bill came through, was calculate, based on their current 10-year projection, what's the difference in rates and what's that result in. They don't look at any other extraneous factors like how does that change the economy. So when they did that projection a year ago, the projection was that there would be $1.5 trillion less in tax receipts. Well, CBO does a revision every 6 months. In their latest revision, 3 months ago, they came back and said, oh, what we're seeing now, what we're projecting because of the growth that's come out of the tax cuts is that we're now going to have another $6 trillion in economic growth over the next 10 years. And so if you take that 17% average tax rate, basically that's going to generate another $1 trillion to pay down that tax debt. So basically 2/3 of the tax cuts have already been paid for in the last 6 months with that revision. There's going to be continued improvement as more people see next April 15th what their tax bill actually was. And as well as all of this money from repatriation overseas is brought back to the United States. We're seeing doubling and tripling of the money that comes in for that. So there's continuing growth from that.
Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Susan. These tax cuts are just another example of lobbyists and campaign donors getting their way in Congress. The fact of the matter is this started off as a $1.5 trillion deficit, and it's now gone to $2.2 trillion. And I'm sure by the time it's done, it will be much greater than that. So what Mr. Estes is overseeing is increasing our deficit by more than $2 trillion in this country. We need representatives in DC who are willing to work to make sure that we not only cut taxes, but also make sure that we're cutting spending in the appropriate places to make sure that we have a balanced approach. We've seen firsthand the disastrous effects of the tax policies of Brownback here in this state. It's not appropriate. We've taken those tax breaks now to the national level, and we're going to destroy the national economy the way Mr. Estes and Sam Brownback destroyed the economy here. It's something that we are better than. We need to make sure that when we pass our tax cuts, that it is protecting working people and not giving big, huge tax breaks, 83%, to the trillionaires, or to the billionaires, I should say, and allowing them to get the majority of these tax savings. The working people in this country had theirs made temporary, and then the corporate tax cuts were made permanent. Now, I know Congress is trying to reverse the last part, but we should have concentrated more on tax relief for working people.
Let me rebut that. From the standpoint of the whole reason why individual rates were temporary to begin with was because Senate Democrats opposed this bill to start with. You know, when we look at every individual in the country got a reduction in rates, regardless of your income. And at the higher rates, the reduction was smaller than at the lower income levels. What we're seeing now is that was also done as part of this is that we were actually aggressively looking at how can we cut things. You know, I was one of the first to propose a rescission to start that process again, to cut billions of dollars from spending, supported a balanced budget amendment to make sure that we actually can get our spending under control.
Thank you. Dion, yours is the next question.
This goes to Mr. Thompson first. Mr. Thompson, in an effort to address trade imbalances and what many believe are unfair business practices by other countries, President Trump has levied tariff taxes on specific products imported to the United States. Some governments, including the Chinese government, have retaliated with tariffs of their own on farm products, which are, of course, crucial exports of the Kansas economy. What do you think of the president's approach to trade policy, and should Congress intervene?
I think that the president's desire to work on the trade deficit is a good idea. We need to work on the trade deficit and make sure that we're trying to have as balanced a trade relationship with everyone as possible. The problem that I have is the execution of that arrangement. He's imposed tariffs, which are aggressive acts, which have created uncertainty and caused a great deal of harm. Our district is the hardest hit district in the entire United States because the two main economic drivers for this district are agriculture and manufacturing. Our farmers are taking it in the shorts right now because of these tariffs. I've got a farmer down near Caldwell, Matt Moreland, who's going to lose about $200,000 on soybeans as a result of these tariffs. And we instead are now going to give them some handouts from the government to help ease that, but that's only going to give him about $50,000. And so he'll lose about $150,000 total because of the tariffs. Our farmers want to be able to sell their product on the open market. They don't want government handouts. They work hard. And we need to make sure that we're protecting their ability to get out there and move this product and not allowing trade to be taken away from the control of Congress. Congress has the power to impose tariffs under the Constitution. Unfortunately, over the last 100 years, they've given that power to the president. They need to roll that back and make sure that any tariffs that go out have been discussed and debated and appropriately vetted before they're passed.
Representative Estes.
So I'm a big advocate of free and fair trade and having open markets, and I have been for a long period of time. You know, we've known in this country for years that NAFTA needed to be modernized. We've known in this country for years that China was cheating on trade agreements, stealing intellectual property. President Trump's the first person to actually step up and do something seriously about that effort. And not only is he making an effort, but he's actually getting accomplishments. When we look at this week, the accomplishments have been made on the upgrades to NAFTA with the new U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement, focusing on how do we improve some of those imbalances. Because when that was put into place 24 years ago, there were some things that were set aside, provisions for Mexico, provisions for Canada, that weren't equitable across the branch. And so that was really what the focus was, and how do we make that better? Now that that agreement's been pulled together, we need to start focusing more seriously on China and how do we get that done. Yes, we're going through the pain process right now. That's a short-term pain process. You know, the farmers that I talk to across the district, the manufacturers that I talk to across the district, they want to make sure that the trade agreements are set up and that they're working and they're effective. They understand that they're struggling now. The farm payments aren't adequate to cover the cost, but what those are a signal to China that China needs to come to the table. We need to get this resolved and we need to move forward.
Actually, like a chance.
Sure.
Unfortunately, what we're doing right now is allowing government to pick our winners and losers in the farming market, and we need to get back to having open markets. As your congressman, I would be standing on the floor on a daily basis raising hell that we need to get these tariffs removed because we're hurting our district. This is not about Republican or Democrat. This is about doing what's best for the people in the 4th District of Kansas, doing what's right for Kansans. And until we have somebody up there doing that, you're going to continue having me run for office and make sure that we get somebody there that can.
Mr. Lawson, you're next. George Lawson from KFDI.
Mr. Estes, one of the most divisive issues in the country in the past couple of years has been the job performance of President Trump, with the controversy over his messages on Twitter, statements he has made on various topics during appearances and rallies across the country. How would you grade Mr. Trump on his performance, and what is your biggest concern? And for Mr. Thompson, with all of the issues surrounding President Trump, what would you say is the best thing he has done in office? Kind of a turnabout question, Mr. Estes.
I think from a standpoint of you look at performance, you really want to look at results and you look at what's happening. So when we look back at what's gone on the last year and a half, the amount of regulatory reform that's happened, the amount of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts and the economic growth that we're getting out of that, you have to give a good grade for that aspect. it's one of those things that, we're now at 4.2% in terms of economic growth last quarter, and the whole year is averaging going up from 3%. And during the Obama administration, it was stuck in a 1.9% growth, which really was people didn't have jobs. They didn't have the opportunity to get jobs. Now we have unemployment, as I mentioned earlier, is down to 3.7%. We actually have 6.9 million open jobs that people are looking for, and only 6 million people to fill them. So that's a huge plus. The president focuses on, as his communication style, he's a negotiator. Sometimes when he makes his negotiating points, it seems like they're outlandish. Some of them are negotiating points, some of them are outlandish comments, I believe. I know from my standpoint, I'm not going to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and tweet. So that's probably, if you want to make a comment around a communication style, that might be a mark that he gets lower instead of the great marks for performance.
Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much, Susan. Things that I would say that President Trump is doing well. He's done a great job of activating Democrats and getting everybody politically motivated to go out and take back Congress. So I appreciate that from him. But I also appreciate the fact that he does talk about some things that need to be done here. Infrastructure. He talks about returning power to working people. He talks about getting rid of the swamp monsters in Washington, D.C., who are more worried about their corporate donors than they are about actually taking care of the people that they're supposed to. Now, what I'd like to see more from President Trump is more action and less tweeting on those kinds of promises that he made. He's promised a new healthcare system that everybody would be covered and everybody would be able to afford, and we haven't seen it. We haven't seen a lot of the promises that he's made. Now, he's talked a great game, and I'm hoping that over the next 2 years that he'll be able to implement some of the things that he said, particularly when it comes to infrastructure, because in this state we need infrastructure a great deal, particularly when it comes to our roads and to our bridges, and making sure that digital infrastructure is taken out to all of our people in the farming communities and rural areas. So I think President Trump can do a lot to get some of those things accomplished, but he would do himself a favor, probably his party a favor too, if he would stay off Twitter.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. The next question is from Facebook. Mary Jo asks, and this is a general question, so I'm going to specify it a little bit. What is your stance on women's rights? Now, I'll get general answers from that, so I'm going to specifically ask, what has Congress done lately to advance women's rights, and what would you like to see done? And Mr. Thompson, do you see a void of advancing women's rights in Congress, and what would you do?
I do see a void in advancing women's rights in Congress. I see a rollback of women's rights, actually, is what we're seeing right now, particularly through our court system, because we are, women aren't considered to have equal rights, is what Justice Scalia had said in one of his rulings. We need to make sure that we pass the Equal Rights Amendment and make sure that women have an actual right that they can rely on to go to the courts that has teeth in it, that they can use to enforce the inequalities in our government. Right now, women are making less than men. It's a fact, 77 cents on the dollar. Women don't have the same standards of care when it comes to health care. They get charged more. We have domestic violence issues that aren't being properly addressed. The laws that were passed slowly have the teeth taken out of those over time because of special interest again and corporations going in and buying off politicians. We need to make sure that we stop that. We need to make sure that the laws that are passed pass constitutional muster and protect working people. Women in this country are equal. Equal means equal, period.
Representative Estes, since Mr. Thompson brought up the Equal Rights Amendment and he said he would be in favor of it, part of your question has been changed now. Would you be in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment?
I don't know that that's an issue that we need to promote again. I mean, we came through that process. It didn't pass the states. That's our process for amending the Constitution. Was you bring up an amendment and people determine whether it's needed or not. It has to pass the 38 states. But I want to talk about add to that some parts from the original question in terms of things that have been accomplished. Our office was one of the first ones to address the hashtag #MeToo movement and the sexual harassment issues that have been around. We focused on making sure that we did the training that was brought forth as part of the bill that I voted on the floor of the House last year. We focused on making sure all of our staff got done, and I was one of the first members of Congress to complete that. We've looked at other things from a legislative standpoint in terms of how do we help protect victims of human trafficking. One of the things that's out there right now is that victims were being forced into slavery, forced into prostitution, and we put an end to that through use of the internet. In fact, we actually shut down Backpages, which was one of those biggest purveyors of prostitution on the internet. And that's one of those things we want to make sure that we support all individuals through that, but particularly protect the safety of women.
Mr. Thompson, looks like you.
I'd like to respond to that. Human trafficking is a huge problem, and we have a particular problem with it here in Wichita. But the fact is that the people that are being punished by a lot of these laws are actually the women themselves. When people are arrested, it's the woman who's being arrested. They're not going after the Johns and the pimps that are out there trafficking these women and selling them. We need to go after those men, not the young women and boys for that matter, that are being trafficked. They are the victims here.
Thank you very much.
That's kind of a misleading answer from the standpoint of what that bill did.
If you would like to, if you would like to rebut the answer, if you're calling it misleading or not right, not truthful?
It's not truthful. I mean, what the bill did that was addressed human trafficking was actually to shut down the purveyors of that, affect the people who are actually selling these victims, whether they were young women or young men. And we made sure that we were going after the sources of this problem as opposed to the victims that were being pulled into that lifestyle.
Okay. We have time for one more question. Boy, time sure did go fast, didn't it? It went quickly. Mr. Fox, you have the last question.
Okay. Mr. Thompson, in general, how do you balance the need that many people feel on the one hand that our borders need to be strengthened, but on the other hand, we also need to maintain our reputation as a country, as a place of refuge for the huddled masses of the world. So how do you see Congress best negotiating these rival needs for security and openness? And Representative Estes, the same question to you. How do you balance the fact that the United States is a place that historically has welcomed those that are fleeing their home countries and looking for opportunities, and at the same time it's a country that obviously needs to maintain its borders?
Right now we have a Statue of Liberty with a very famous poem on it that begins something to the effect of, "Bring us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." We have historically been welcoming to immigrants. Unfortunately, what we've seen though is xenophobia being propagated by those on the right and forcing people that come into this country to be separated from their families. We've seen children in cages, and this is wrong. We need to have a firm but fair immigration system in place. We need to protect our borders from criminals coming into our country. But people that are here, that are working, that are going to school with us, that are providing for their family, doing the things that we want all Americans to do, we need to make sure that they have a path to citizenship, that they have the ability to live the American dream too. So we need to make sure that the DACA recipients and the Dreamers, that they have the ability to become legal citizens in this country. We need to make sure that when we're going after somebody to deport them, we need to make sure it's because they are a criminal, violent crimes, or something to that effect. We can do better in the way that we protect our borders, but we also have to remember the humanity that we have as well, and that we are a country of immigrants, and that we need to make sure everyone has that opportunity.
Representative Estes.
Our country always has been supportive of immigrants. In fact, even today, we are the country that has the largest number of immigrants coming into the country on an ongoing basis. And the thing to add to that, though, is that our immigration processes are broken. We've had so many processes where somebody's trying to go through legally, whether they're trying to become a citizen, whether they're trying to get work permits, whether they're trying to get a college education and then apply for work, or if they've come in illegally. All these things have broken through that process. What we've tried to do is make sure that I supported this summer. We had 2 bills that come through the House of Representatives. A bill that actually would address 4 main pillars that the president was talking about. And the first one was about border security, because you can't have an immigration process that works if you don't know who's coming in and out of your country. And so that involved getting more border agents, making sure that we had the right surveillance capabilities, as well as having fencing or a wall in certain parts where it made sense, where houses were across the street from each other. Also addressing visa programs, making sure that more people were able to come in here for merit work programs, and not necessarily just because they were related to an extended family member coming in. So we need to address more. We need to do that, but we need to continue to make sure we're a big immigrant country.
All right. This concludes the debate, minus the closing statements. So, Mr. Thompson, I believe you're first on closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you to KPTS and to the Wichita Eagle for allowing us to come in and have this debate. Thank you, Congressman, for appearing. Our government's broken. We can do better. And it doesn't matter which party's in office, things still remain gridlocked in Washington, D.C. Congress is simply not doing its job. It's more concerned about getting reelected than it is about sitting down and doing the hard work of running this country. My opponent is more concerned about attending parties and making sure that he gets corporate paychecks than he is making sure that he's standing on the floor of Congress and demanding that we remove these tariffs so that the people in our district are no longer hurt. It's his district, and we're being hurt more than anyone in the country. In this race, we've got a clear contrast. You've got a do-nothing Congress led by Congressman Ron Estes, and then you have myself, a U.S. Army infantry veteran that's been trained to get the job done by working together with people and using the assets available. I want to go to Congress to take care of the people in this district. I want to go to take care of the infrastructure, make sure that our infrastructure here has the ability to provide internet to every single person out there. I want to make sure that our farmers are protected, and I want to fight for them to make sure that we have a farm bill that allows them to farm and then gets the hell out of their way so that they can farm freely. I want to make sure we protect our children, our seniors, and our veterans. We can do this. My name's James Thompson. Thank you so much, and I hope you'll vote for me on November 6th.
Representative Estes, 90 seconds.
Tonight, the difference couldn't be more clear. My opponent wants a big government with higher taxes. I want to have a limited government and get out of the way so you have more freedom and choices to succeed. In Washington, I've stood up for our district and achieved some great results. Today, President Trump signed a bipartisan 5-year FAA reauthorization bill that included 2 provisions that I put in there to support general aviation, as well as making sure that we enhance airline safety around the world. Last week, the House passed a bill to rename the Big Ditch in honor of Mitch Mitchell, who was the primary architect of making that project happen. In the House of Representatives, we passed over 770 bills this session, and over half of those were by unanimous consent, Republicans and Democrats working together. I've worked with Republicans and Democrats to focus on things that are beneficial for Kansans, like protecting veterans and rebuilding our military, protecting Social Security for current and future generations, promoting free trade, making sure that we have low taxes and low regulations to help keep our economic growth going, and to protect the Second Amendment and the unborn. We've passed 58 bills addressing the opioid crisis, which is the largest amount any Congress has done for a single drug epidemic. We passed the right to try, which gives individuals an opportunity to try medicine that gives them a bigger chance for life. We've invested in rural broadband, mental health programs, apprenticeship programs. Our economy and our country are better off now. I'm Ron Estes, and I ask you for your vote on November 6th.
All right, we have come to the conclusion of our debate. I want to thank both the candidates for being here and coming to KPTS Public Television for your first live telecast debate. And the panelists, thank you very much for being here. And thank you for watching. The election, as a reminder, just 4 weeks away. We do hope this debate helped you maybe decide how you'll vote, or at least make you want to do a little more research. I'm Susan Peters. Thank you for watching.